and welcome to episode 3 of Elephant Diaries. My name is Siana Bangura and I'm a writer, blogger and poet from London. In the previous episodes of this series, I've given you an insight into what you can expect from my upcoming collection, Elephant, and in this episode you can expect more of the same. So, it's recently been Valentine's Day, so I suppose, everyone's still in kind of the mood for love. Well, I'm about to bring it down to here, because this section of Elephant is all about, let's say, trials and tribulations with the men in my life, or rather the men who used to be in my life. The first poem in this section of the book is called Betrayal, and it's really what it says on the tin. It's basically just about kind of having expectations and being let down, and it goes like this. There's nothing quite like knowing that there is a person out there in the wild who knows your body intimately and knows all your carefully kept secrets, even though they don't deserve it. Indeed, there is really nothing like it. And I have been known to sleep with wolves and give them second chances, and chant redeeming spells, breeding a special kind of sadness, birthing a special kind of sorrow. There's nothing quite like the regret you feel when he tells you there's been someone else. His mistakes have left you wounded. No, there is no burn like it, no thunder as loud and no scream as piercing, no bomb as lethal, no knife as sharp. There's nothing quite like knowing that he's not who you thought he was, and that you were bought and sold like cattle. There's nothing quite like knowing that he's moved away, and he's not thinking about this anymore. All the while you fight it, whilst it eats you, chewing on your skin. Nowadays you constantly remind yourself that there are more important things than that person in the wild who betrayed you. No. There's really nothing like it. So I wrote that poem when I was feeling a little bit bitter, a little bit upset, but I felt a lot better afterwards. For me, writing is definitely a healing process, a form of catharsis, and this poem is a good example of that. And I suppose, I made use of kind of the idea of night, the idea of wolves, the story of the boy who cried wolf, the boy who lied and then no one believed him after a while. And I made use of kind of the idea of magic and mythology. And I think it just felt very fitting, to be honest, because of the place that I was in at the time. But I think a lot of us can really relate to putting your trust into someone and them letting you down. And kind of thinking that someone is one thing and then they show that they are another, and sometimes feeling quite bad that you gave them so much time and you, I suppose, showed parts of yourself, your character, things like that you didn't show to other people. But it's all about, learning and kind of learning your lessons and moving on. So I think this poem is definitely about that process of kind of coming to terms with things and moving on also. I have loved and I have lost, walked down these streets, and I can confirm that all these things are bittersweet. That's a really short 5-line poem called Hoxton Oxymorons, and it's just a small reflection on kind of love and loss, about simultaneously feeling really happy, but also knowing that this is the end and knowing that things are about to change from this point. I actually wrote it when I was in Hoxton after coming out of an Ego LMA gig a while back now. And just this idea of kind of loss and kind of navigating those bittersweet feelings. And it's quite interesting that I wrote it in Hoxton, just because in terms of East London or that kind of area, it's undergone a lot of kind of loss, a lot of social cleansing, a lot of gentrification. So I suppose it's quite pertinent for those reasons as well. But it's just a short poem, and it's definitely up to the reader how they take it and what it means to them. The next piece in this section of the collection is called Balloons, and as the title suggests, it's about letting go. when I gave it this title, I definitely thought about the idea of kind of holding a balloon and letting it go off into the air, off into the distance, and not knowing what's going to happen to it, but sort of saying goodbye. And this poem is definitely just about kind of saying goodbye. And I guess, you know, every poem in this section really is about about loss, I suppose, about the ending of relationships, but definitely, you know, kind of saying, but we've finished something here, but something new is going to start. Balloons goes like this. The end is a funny thing, a funny place to start. But I've written about you to death and chronicled our death, and I'm now chronicling my rebirth. You're jetting off to Brazil, and I may never see you again. I flirted with the idea of going to your leaving do and saying goodbye to you, letting bygones be bygones and sweeping the dirt under the carpet, setting the chaos alight so that it would turn to ashes and I could cremate you, better than burying you. I thought on it and then I thought again. In the quiet of my space, I've said goodbye and said good luck and said good riddance. In my heart, I've said goodbye again and again. This is the final vindication, and my pen has now run out of ink. My pen has now run dry, and I won't refill it this time. I've left you to float with balloons and kites and hot air balloons, out of sight and out of mind. And as I say, it's a poem about kind of letting go. It's definitely a poem about journey, about travelling. The particular person, I suppose, that inspired this poem made a journey, essentially. And yeah, I also made a journey and kind of moved on. And it just follows really nicely from the poems that precede it, kind of talking about coming to understand that you need to end something and then finally doing it. The fourth and final poem in this section of Elephant is called Matchstick Men and Women. And it ends on a very heavy note, actually. This poem is about domestic violence, about abuse in relationships. So a trigger warning for anyone watching about that, and trigger warning for anyone who is going to read it. You know, I just basically created two characters who are extremely, extremely dependent on each other. And I think dependency is quite key. They quite literally can't live without each other. But in saying that, the person who is being abused comes to understand by the end that this has to end in one way or another. And you know, we get insight into the mind of the person who is causing the destruction, and we understand that that person too has been through a lot and has also endured abuse. And this is something that a lot of women, a lot of like young girls, a lot of men, a lot of people go through and suffer in silence. And I am glad to see that we are talking about domestic violence in all sorts of communities a lot more, but it's definitely something that we need to not shy away from. It's a taboo subject indeed, but it's taboo for a reason. And yes, that's a trigger warning for anybody who's watching. The first few lines of the poem go like this. Quiet now. All is quiet now. Struck with a match, lit the petrol and watched it blow to smithereens. Silent now. All is silent now. You use the bleach to burn off his touch, to erase his reach so that you could finally sleep. Troubled now. You are troubled now. He raised his hands to reclaim the name they took from him, to reclaim the name man. Fragile now. We are fragile now. So those are just the first few lines of this poem. And as I said, it's just, you know, kind of exploring just a really difficult, poisonous, toxic relationship. And, you know, a lot of people find themselves in those sorts of relationships, even if there's no actual violence, but violence comes in many different forms. It doesn't have to be being hit or physically abused. It can be being emotionally abused. It can be mental abuse. It can be anything like that, really, anything difficult and toxic. And as I said, I think it's something that our communities shy away from talking about. I think we have a long way to go with kind of understanding and accepting that there are things that, if we're talking about kind of just, you know, men and women. A lot of violence, you know, is definitely kind of inflicted by men onto women. We have to be honest about that, and not shy away from that discussion. And you know, we're approaching International Women's Day in March, and you know, I think that's just a topic that we need to keep talking about. There are lots of things that affect women quite specifically, or people who are female presenting femmes. And I think it's just, we have to just keep on having the conversation. And again, you know, this collection is called Elephant because we're trying to address the elephants in the room, and that topic is definitely one of the big elephants in the room. It's something, you know, I myself have experienced in my personal life. I think a lot of people are children of those kind of circumstances. And I think there's not always enough support out there at the time. I think in some communities, the women are told that they have to just be quiet about it, and they just need to carry on, and they just need to pray, and hopefully things will get better. But I think we need to do better and have more honest discussions. And yeah, that definitely was the inspiration behind this poem. So that's the end of episode 3 of Elephant Diaries. I hope I didn't ruin your Valentine's mood too much. But there are important discussions to be had in that section. I definitely started to address these kind of taboo things that we don't often talk about, or we are scared to talk about. All that's left for me to say is thank you very much for tuning in, and keep an eye out for the next episode of Elephant Diaries. See you later.